Chapter 711. Clear the road. Dominic waited with Amy until a whole unit of guards arrived, enough to surround the trucks and properly escort them into the palace. Under normal circumstances, it would be unthinkable for an entire caravan of potatoes to be delivered directly to the royal palace, but that seemed to be the only safe way to do it right now. With the guards in place, the convoy started to come through the portal, and every prediction of the chaos that it would cause proved to be an underestimate. The citizens swarmed to the food, desperate for anything that they could get. Naturally, the caravan guards weren't going to cut down a bunch of starving civilians when they were escorting food for the city. So, they climbed on the truck and began tossing handfuls of potatoes out into the crowd, which was what the crowd wanted, but it only encouraged even more people to rush forward to get their hands on the food. They weren't willing to wait for the distribution and risk that the good stuff would go to the surviving nobles first. And that brought the progress of the convoy to a crawl, even with the palace guards escorting them. They were still moving, but when Dominic hopped up on the first truck and extended his wings, the crowd rushed out of the street in front of them. There were a lot of things that they were willing to do for food at this point, but standing in front of the butcher of Westover was not one of them. You had to be alive to eat, after all. With Dominic's appearance clearing the road for them, the trucks trundled forward, a steady stream from the portal to the palace, dragging the crowd along with them. I'm glad that I'm not in charge of distributing this. I don't think that the crowd is concerned about where tomorrow's meal is coming from when they can see today's. Dominic joked to the driver of the truck he was standing on. The driver laughed as they made their way through the city. There aren't enough people to eat everything in this convoy in a day. Well, not in this part of town anyhow. The idea was that the full shipment should be basic ration-level supplies for the remaining population. We've got nearly half of it, so it should keep the city supplied for most of the month. If they're only eating potatoes. It's not much of a diet, but I'm sure that they can come up with something to serve with them. Dominic laughed and held up a small bag from his storage ring. I thought of this as well. I've got a whole bag full of spices from the manor grounds. I don't know what survived the flood, but I do know that spiced potatoes are better than unspiced potatoes. The driver raised an empty wineskin up to Dominic, who took it and refilled it with level 3 wine. Good stuff for the driver, but not the sort of extreme level that would mess with his driving. Thanks for that. Driving is thirsty work, and we're not likely to find much of anything here. The palace guard was formed up at the gates to the outer palace courtyard, and behind them, Dominic could see that the formerly manicured gardens had been turned into a tent city for the soldiers and nobles of Dagos who had their territories flooded. Dominic could see why everyone was worried about the distribution of the food, with the nobles mostly staying in the palace until the city was cleaned of the mess of the floods. The work was well underway, and portions of it were already beginning to look inhabited as he had passed by. But he could still see the high water line on the low side of town. So, most of the noble district shouldn't have flooded. But that didn't mean it had survived the zombie invasion intact. An extremely nervous-looking young man, or perhaps still a boy, given his youthful appearance, greeted them at the gate. Welcome, Duke Westover. I am Assistant Castellan James, and I will be doing the inventory on the shipment. Rest assured, we will calculate for the early distribution and shrinkage caused during the journey through the city. How much have you sent? I cannot see the end of the convoy. 2,000 tons of potatoes and 1 trailer load of Magitech stove inserts to help lessen the demand for firewood and coal in the city. The youthful assistant was shaking in his boots, and Dominic quickly realized that it wasn't the situation he was afraid of. Dominic terrified him. All right, that should be 101 trucks then? What is in the first one? That is the Magitech fireplace inserts. The rest of the convoy is loose loaded bulk potatoes, as we lacked bags for such a large shipment on short notice. We do have large amounts of flax growing in the duchy, but it was not ready for harvest, and we lack a large enough textile mill at the moment to make the canvas. However, I do intend to have that remedied soon, for ease of unloading. The boy focused as Dominic put his wings and claws away. He was furiously scribbling at his notepad with a frown. We do not have a large enough storage house in the palace for that. There were some damages when the wall was breached. However, we can make space as the city is cleaned and the temporary residents move back home. Please hold the truck of fireplace inserts on the left and the first truck of potatoes outside the gates. We will distribute directly out of the vehicle today. Fortunately, we have a system for this. Dominic didn't know what he meant, but he shouted the orders to the driver, who looked relieved that he wouldn't be public enemy number one. With a gentle twist, he leapt down from the truck and landed next to the gate guards, who were moving to begin unloading the truck. What's the system for distribution? We gave every address a ration token based on head count while we were assessing survivors. Every week they turn in the token for rations, and we give them a new one for the next week. It lets us see if there is disease spreading in the city and prevents hoarding to some degree. I'm sure that there is some in the slums, stolen tokens, and intimidation to steal the food, but we're doing what we can to make sure that the people are getting fed. Chapter 7:12. And empty the trucks. Dominic nodded at the guard, while others began shouting orders, and the residents of Albrols began to push forward with pillowcases in their hands and paper tokens outstretched. The guards took the pillowcases and dumped a bucket full of potatoes in it, roughly 5 kilos per token. Larger families get multiple tokens, but they'll send more than one person to collect it, as we don't let them turn in multiples to prevent obvious abuse. The exception to the rule is the Healers Guild. They can bring us a whole stack of tokens for their patients who can't make it here, or shouldn't for the sake of preventing infection. But the patients have to either come get next week's token, or be counted by the guards to be sure they're still alive, the assistant castellan explained before waving the rest of the trucks into the palace's long driveway. Getting 100 trucks into this space was going to be tight, but it was designed to hold a huge number of carriages, so Dominic thought that they should be able to get most of them in. They would likely empty a good portion of the trucks today, as they were handing out a week's rations at a time. But the rest would get unloaded as fast as they could into the palace storage. That warehouse at least had proper facilities. There was a steep ramp to make unloading easier, and then a mechanical conveyor system driven by either Magitech or wind turning a wheel. Dominic wasn't sure, as he couldn't see the drive mechanism. But he had seen the style before, and the miller in Westover used a windmill. Trucks were already being led to the ramp, while the others were ushered in as quickly as possible. Getting them out of the public eye, so they could properly sort the delivery, was key to the success of this mission. Dominic stood to the side, out of the way, and watched the process, while Amy scanned the area for threats and signs of deceit. We should send it 5 kilos at a time in a 20-kilo sack next month, she suggested. That makes no sense. The shapeshifter laughed. A 20-kilo grain or flour sack made of decent linen is commonly reused by farm wives and slum residents to make clothing for the children. The sack itself is valuable in this situation, and a 5-kilo sack is too small. The realization dawned on Dominic. I've seen that and just never realized it before. The filthy white dresses that the girls of the nomadic tribes wear. They're made from flour sacks modified into clothing.
Exactly.
The nomads are usually too poor to pay for soap, so the white doesn't last long. The pants and shirts that the boys wear are as well, but they stain them in clay to blend into the desert sands. The first truck was quickly unloaded into the crowd and moved out of the way for a fresh one to be shifted into position, much to the crowd's relief. Clearly, there was food, and it was going to be distributed. But they were hungry now. Once every truck was within the palace walls, Amy smiled. All right, let's get a move on. They can take care of themselves from here out. Just get the delivery order signed off, and we can send it directly back to the palace. I got a token from the princess that will send small paper items through a portal to the mailroom. Not the most efficient way to deliver the news, but the royal mailroom should be pretty trustworthy. Besides, who would question his word, and that of the Merchants Guild, that the delivery made it here, even if Dagos denied it? If you could sign off on the delivery receipt, we will be on our way, he informed the castellan's assistant. Of course, Your Grace. Here you go. Do you require an escort back to the portal platform? Dominic laughed and shook his head, then whistled to call Dave over. If they want to fight their way through a group of armored mountain trolls to stop me from leaving, they're welcome to it. Dave likes crumping idiots with his club. It's a good club. Dave confirmed. How far out do we need to go to open a portal? Amy asked. Most of the way to the portal platform. But opening one without the platform all the way to Westover won't be easy. Got it. She could do it. She had a remarkable affinity for portals, especially to Westover. But keeping up the pretense that their abilities were as limited as others was important to ensuring everyone thought that her role was largely decorative. Sure, everyone recognized that she was Dominic's personal mage, but his reputation was so scary that everyone just assumed that she was there for versatility, not for combat power. It helped that she liked to shoot people. When a mage pulled a gun in combat, nobody took their skills as a mage seriously. They just assumed that the damage they were doing was a result of the weapon, not their own abilities. While that was usually true, Amy had mastered the art of stacking spells on mana bullets. All right, we're off. It's been a pleasure. Please give our greetings to the king, and tell him that we will continue to keep him supplied with fresh vegetables for the foreseeable future. I have designated farms specifically to making the payments to Albrols. The young man smiled, nearly weeping with relief. Thank you, Duke Westover. I will surely pass along the good news. If I could make a request to possibly continue to send potatoes? They don't require any additional processing, and only a few of the granaries and flour mills have been repaired and sanitized so far. Bulk shipments of grain have proven problematic for other regions. Got it. We will include other vegetables in future shipments as well, but I will try to keep them potato-based. Westover isn't a major grain crop producer anyhow. We've got grain fields, but they're not the most efficient of our crops. Chapter 713. Effective Escort. The small procession of trolls around Dominic cleared the road more effectively than the trucks had. They didn't have anything that the locals wanted. At least, nothing that the people wanted badly enough to take the beating that would come with trying to steal it. Plus, mountain trolls in full battle armor were absolutely horrifying to the average person. With that advantage, they made it back to the platform nearly as quickly as they had crossed with the trucks. But when they arrived, they found that the platform was blocked by a crowd of people. The delivery is finished. There are no more trucks coming from Westover today. Dominic called as he approached. The crowd parted, allowing them access, but Dominic could see that everyone was tensed for action. Is there something you all needed? One older man nodded. We're leaving. The moment that you open that portal, we intend to rush through. Anywhere has to be better than here. Everyone around him gave him disbelieving stares. In this situation, you are clearly supposed to lie about your intentions. Dominic sighed. There is no need for all that. I can hold it open for a few minutes. However, I will inform you that the residents of Westover tend to treat theft as a capital crime if the guards aren't around. We have a refugee camp, but do not allow vagrancy. If you're planning to find work and become productive residents of the city, we will let you through. If not, I recommend that you stay here, where things are familiar and the laws are more forgiving. The militia member farmers and the barons tended to operate on the 3S rule for bandits and thieves. Shoot, shovel, shut up. If all the thieves went missing, there were no thefts in Westover. In fact, the system worked so well that they didn't even have a dedicated judge. The few crimes that warranted judgment were brought to Dominic, and the rest were handled by Sheriff Nate. The mention of thievery being punished with death and the Duke looking the other way caused a portion of the crowd to fade back into the city. They had thought that they could beg in the wealthier city, perhaps a few home visit robberies, and then move on to where nobody knew them again. Westover was supposed to be the land of wine and honey, the wealthiest duchy on the continent. But if the butcher of Westover was willing to ignore the law and let his people behave like him, they were out. Not worth it. You're certain that it won't cause you issues? Westover always has issues. But we're also willing to welcome those who are willing to help themselves. However, you should know that it is not Dago's, and the Dago's attitude toward non-humans won't work there. Much of the population is either a mage or a sorcerer, and that's not counting the trolls. The best jobs in town require a high degree of either trade skill or magitech affinity, as Westover is a magitech manufacturing hub. So don't jump in blind, just because things are bad here right now. We have arranged monthly food deliveries to keep the city from starving, and Albrols will be rebuilt soon enough. Dominic informed the crowd. That seemed to calm some of them, making them reconsider staring over somewhere completely new. Others were just now realizing that life with a bunch of non-humans might not be for them, and that the Dago's culture wasn't universal. But there was still a core who looked determined to give it a shot. We will be making these deliveries the same way every month if you need time to reconsider. They are still handing out ration bags if you want to go home and think on it. They're sacks of potatoes, but they're good potatoes. The old man who had so openly informed him of their intentions smiled, then shook his head. I'm not so destitute that I can't buy a sack of potatoes when I get there. I'm certain that they're quite good. But I'm not from Albrols. I just ended up stuck here after the flooding. I will follow you through. A few others nodded, but most of the Albrols locals decided to go get the food and wait a month to see if things really did get better here. At least, now they weren't going to be starving. That was enough for most of them to give their hometown and their king a chance. Things had been absolutely awful. They had lost a war, lost territory, and now they had sold off territory to stop the bleeding at the end of a civil war that had split the nation. But there was still some hope for Dagos. What they didn't know was that the southwestern region that the king managed to hold was the only truly inhabited region left. Most of the rest of the regions that broke off from Dagos had under 100,000 survivors in their entire region. After a few seconds of consideration, there were only a dozen left who had decided that they definitely wanted to come to Westover. That was a manageable number, and from the look of them, they hadn't lost absolutely everything, just everything that couldn't be packed into a storage ring. They weren't the desperately poor before the disaster, and they still had a bit to fall back on, as no amount of money could buy what they needed in Albrols. All right, follow me if you're coming to Westover. There is a bit of a housing shortage, so I will have the guard patrols lead you to the refugee camp. They have the housing and job listings posted there, so it's the best place to start. Most people move in and out of there in under a week, so don't think of it as a long-term situation, more like camping out when you can't get a room at the inn, which might actually have rooms if you have coin. The old man smiled. That should work out wonderfully. If you've got workers, I might even be able to set up a new shop. Dominic nodded. We do. What sort of shop did you have before? Hats. Widgeon Hat Works was the finest hatter on the entire continent. Now, Widgeon is gone. The entire city was washed into the ocean. Not much call for new hats in Albrols these days. And it would be a job that didn't require Magitech skills. Perfect for those who were struggling in Westover. Chapter 7:14, Scatterbrained. Once they were back in Westover, and the new arrivals were sent off to be processed at the refugee camp, where Dominic was certain they wouldn't spend more than one night. Given their motivation levels, it was time to get back to the paperwork of running a duchy. However, that wasn't the only thing that he had to do. There were new soldiers here now, to be sent to the frontier lands of Kainwen province, keeping order in the wilderness until the residents settled back into their homes, and new nobles were assigned to the region. Amy, Dave, I will need both of you for this next part. We're going to have to give a bunch of Malton Knights a crash course in what it is to be a proper Wavemates patrol unit. Amy, I will ask you to get the Wings of Light, spells for them made by the sect. Dave, we're going to have to teach them about soup. Amy laughed, while the trolls smiled. Is there a reason that you need to teach them about soup? Amy asked. I'm going to have either mages or trolls go with them to do logistics and drive the supply trucks. But the Malton Knights are mostly pretentious, noble-born paladins from families without the influence to get them into the Royal Knights. I honestly suspect that we're going to have to do a fair bit of retraining before we can send them out to patrol the wilderness looking for bandits with any sort of efficiency. I will go with them on the first patrol so that I can show them around and introduce them to the barons, and so I can see Kainwen province from the ground. It might not be as bad as we feared, but it did get hit pretty hard, and it was sparsely populated to begin with. There might actually be thousands of farmers and small towns just doing their thing, without any worries right now. Letting them know that they can contact the night patrols for assistance will keep the peace, and it will spread the word that the region is under our protection in a meaningful sense, not just a political one. Once the word of that spreads, I think that we can start seeing more residents return, and fewer people turning desperate enough to resort to banditry. There will still be more than a little of it, as the capital was lost, and surely not everyone went down with it. But we will do what we can. That was a lot of words to say that you really want them to not make more work for you. But I get you, and soup culture has an advantage over ration packs, in that you can always add more water to the soup if you've got extra guests coming. Mostly, he actually needed to ensure that they were skilled enough with the rifles and pistols that he could send them out on patrol and trust that they weren't going to ignore the best weapons in favor of using swords. Noble ideals were all well and good, but they didn't have much place in bandit suppression. I will go get the spell gems you need from the sect. They've been making them in anticipation of you requesting them. I should warn you though, they're an advanced spell, and have to be made by higher-ranking elders, so they're going to put a heavy dent in your monthly spending. Dominic sighed. Well, we can start them with a 10-man strike force. That is as many as our royal guards, and they're looking incredibly impressive in training. I may have forgotten to consider how expensive spell gems could get when I requested so many of them. We will likely still need a bunch more for the duchy, just not right away. I suspected that might be the case. We did equip the mages who are going out on classified missions or escort missions for the duchy with some of the new spells. Specifically, the shuriken wall. That one is just too good, and it really does plow fields well. We tested with the trolls the other day. With the mages tagging along, I don't think that they will have too many problems. All of the Duskblade sect's mission specialists are experts. But that reminds me, we should put up the Wall of Brambles spell around the academy walls. They're not much of a wall, as they're just intended to keep students from wandering off and wild animals out. With the brambles around them, they would make for a proper fortification. Plus, they would be pretty. Dave added helpfully. The stone walls were good, but covering them in flowers didn't make them any less sturdy. Well, it seems that we still have more than enough to do for the day, so let's get started with bringing over the new soldiers and introducing them to the training grounds. We'll set them up over by the goats for now, as they've got their own staff for the horses and don't need our stable hands. There are trolls over by them. We will bring them to the goats and tell them to set camp inside. Don't worry, boss. Everything will be ready for training. Dave insisted. All right, that's one thing handled. What is next? It feels like I'm so far behind that I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Dominic sighed. In that case, let's have lunch while the soldiers move, and then we can start over with a full stomach. Amy offered, then smiled. You know, you don't actually have to do any of the training or equipping part, other than making them the new gear. You could just go to the forge after lunch and leave the rest to the combat and magic experts, she added. Now that is a wonderful idea. I don't spend nearly enough time in the forge these days. They also need rifles, so I'll have to make new parts before they can go anywhere. In fact, I can have the advisors come to me in the forge, instead of sitting in the office all day. Whoa there, slow your roll. Dominic laughed at the bemused expression on the mage's face. Well, Jack certainly wouldn't object, even if just because nobody comes to the forge, so he could drink while he gives his report. Chapter 7:15. A bit more training. Once lunch was over and Dominic was properly focused again, he retreated to the forge to start working on the weapons for the new knights who had been assigned to his territory. This was the best place to be, he decided. It was somewhere that he could relax. Everywhere else he went, there was stress and paperwork. Here, there was just the forge and occasionally a visitor. Mostly the advisors, as they had constant updates for him about the arrival of the knights, the start of the training, the reports that the merchants and the other airships had sent back, and various updates from the businesses around town. Things were operating as intended, and by the end of the first day, the city had a new hat shop, with a purchase of felt and leather on credit from the Merchants Guild, in trade for guaranteed first rights to the products until the debt was paid. That was pretty common for factories who were short on cash. It wouldn't help them pay the bills, but if they could make more than what the materials cost, they would get enough from the guild to at least pay their workers after all their loans were paid. Normally, it was a sign that a shop was about to go under, and the guild offered the loans specifically to try to get back as much of what they were owed as possible. But in this case, they had some faith that the shop would succeed. With all of his rifle jigs out, the small forge was a crowded place, but he could turn out the parts at incredible speed, just letting muscle memory repeat the process part by part until he had a whole room worth of full parts bins. By then, it was well past dark, and he tossed them in his storage ring to complete in the morning. They still needed the Magitech cores to create their own ammunition, and Dominic didn't want to have to pay the mages to make them when he was already racking up the bills putting their elders to work making flying spells for the special forces. But it was going to be glorious. It didn't matter whether they came across monsters, bandits, or a hostile enemy army. Nobody was going to expect flying riflemen. Sure, everyone knew that they had rifles and mortars, but it wasn't the mages that were notorious for using them, it was the Signian noblemen. And while a few of them could use more magic than the basics, very few of the natural sons had a magic-related trade skill core. The next morning, Dominic lingered in bed a little longer than usual, using his wing to shield Alexis from the light of the window, much to the frustration of the maids. Fine, I will get out of bed, but know that it is done under protest, he finally relented. Good idea. If she sleeps in too long, she's just going to be extra hungry when she does get up, and that's not good for anyone. Alexis chuckled to herself as she heard them bickering. She certainly wasn't that grumpy in the morning, but she certainly was hungry. It seemed like every day she was getting bigger and hungrier. Given another few weeks, and she was going to have to get her dresses altered again. That would not happen. It was too much work for a few weeks that they would actually fit, so it was time that she was going to have to actually switch to maternity wear loose dresses or pants with a tunic shirt. While the latter was not made for pregnant women, it worked well for the paunchy beer bellies of noblemen, and that sort of flexibility was perfect for her. Dominic smiled as he saw that she had chosen to go with the loose pants tucked into high boots and an oversized sweater today that he was fairly certain came from his closet. It was actually a good look, but he could already imagine the scandalized expression of any noblewoman or farm wife that saw it. However, she wasn't planning to go out anywhere today. The entire day was dedicated to working in the office, while she watched from the window as the royal guards updated the training of the Malton Knights. They were going to be teaching the new men about the basics of ballistic weapons, then combined arms group tactics. Fighting alongside mages and artillery pieces required a very different set of tactics and skills than fighting alongside archers and swordsmen. And until they actually had the men on the training field, there was no way to tell if they knew anything at all about it. So, the entire yard was busy, including both forges, as some of the horses needed fresh shoes, and the farrier had a small forge in the stable for exactly that purpose. Dominic watched the royal guard teaching formations with mortars set up in the yard, arranging soldiers so that they could not only guard the artillery, but also trap and eliminate any force that came for them. Then, they moved into breaching techniques, using the wings of light, spell to rush the wall. They skimmed the ground, running with magical assistance, then spread their wings to full extension and used the momentum to run up the wall. They were practicing with spears, but when he had the rifles ready, they could change tactics and add a pause at the top of the jump to shoot with relative stability before dropping into the enemy fortress and switching to pistols. It would be an absolutely brutal tactic executed at night against a walled fortress or camp. The enemy wouldn't even realize that they were under attack until there were knights firing into their formations and breaching the walls. They could even go for guard towers to silently eliminate lookouts, or gain the high ground to shoot down into the compound. If the location had a portcullis, its controls would normally be atop a tower as well, making for an easy entry into the city. Chapter 716 Order of Operations. Dominic quickly assembled the Magitech orbs of create munitions and assembled the rifles one after another all day long, and then again the next day. He had the process down to an art form now, and while he didn't have enough rifles ready for an entire night patrol, it was enough to get started. They also needed pistols, which were much quicker to create, and some better spears. The ones that they were sent with were just level 3 uncommon items, the sort that the Royal Forge sent out to sergeants. Apparently their order was either short of favor with the Royal Forge, or these knights were not deployed in the capital during the siege, so they never got the supplies of the Royal Forge at that time. If they were going to represent him as governor, he needed to give them something that would actually make them impressive in combat beyond their training. That meant the good stuff. Dominic reluctantly took out some fresh mana oil and a level 12 monster core. This one had come from something that was earth element aligned, not something that he had killed personally, but it would do just fine for the job. All he had to do was inscribe a swiftness rune on each of the weapons, then give them a heavy dose mana, and they should become a rare grade level 12 spear. Incredibly valuable by trade prices, but not so outlandish that they would seem as if they had been overgeared for the job. The rifles were nearly as good, and the pistols were level 5 uncommon weapons. It was his standard for mass-produced pistols, and let him remember which ones were cast with transmutation magic and which ones he had actually handmade. If the design didn't match the level, he would know that it was a fake, and someone was trying to turn out weapons while pretending to be him. Naturally, the knights were going to become gunslingers just because they got a bit more kit. But pistols would allow them to slow the enemy while they closed the range, and it would surprise enemies who weren't expecting to be shot at by paladins. He was just finishing up a batch of pistols when Dave brought lunch out to him. Not from the manor kitchens, from the guard kitchens which were closer. That meant lunch was an entirely oversized bowl of soup, portioned for a mountain troll that was 5 times his body mass, along with an entire loaf of sourdough bread. You know what? This looks wonderful. Thank you, Dave. The troll gave him a silly grin. I told that chef Beth lady that we would take good care of you while you worked. You're busy making guns for the new soldiers, so we made extra food for you. Working harder means starving by lunch, so I brought the bigger bowl. The troll retreated to his post by the door, and Dominic set the weapons aside while he ate. This rhythm was going well. All they needed was a couple of weeks to train the knights in the new techniques, and then they would be on their way for a tour of the provinces. And that was how, when the advisors came in with their afternoon updates, they found Dominic at the side table in the forge, spoon in one hand and pistol in the other, eating from an absurdly large bowl while testing weapons for functionality. Come in, come in. What do you have for me today? The docks are about to turn out another airship, and they need an update on what customer it should go to. We have identical orders from both Seaport Nobles and the Merchants Guild, but the dwarves say that they don't know who gets priority. That's actually a good question. The guild had their order in first, but the king wants airships delivered to the nobles as soon as possible. Duke Seavden is willing to buy 10 of them outright, no need for payment terms. That is more than I had expected, but it will cause issues if he starts trying to bypass the guild right away. However, if we make them wait weeks or a month before the first noble gets an airship after we deliver this one to the guild, the king is going to have questions I don't want to answer. So, what I'm thinking is that we give this one to Earl Tarley of Port Tarley. He only wanted one airship, he's in on the king's plan, but not particularly enthusiastic about it. He just wants a fast airship to move goods between distant sides of the coast. That meets the requirement, and he did put in the first request, so we can claim we're just being fair about things, Dominic suggested. Lord Blackwell pursed his lips as he considered the plan. That's actually not a terrible idea. Tarley has a horrid reputation as a city, but everyone knows the Earl as someone who can get what you need. Mostly because he does business with pirates off the books. Getting the airship to him will ensure that everyone knows how good they are, and not just from watching the merchants arrive in them. Seavden is a better businessman, but that just means he's less likely to brag openly about the capabilities of his equipment. It's better for him to let people think that it's not quite as impressive as it actually is so that he can over-deliver and come up with borderline miraculous delivery schedules. Anyone else? The other advisors shook their heads, and Jack Merlot shrugged. It's always good to hand off a shiny toy to a man who loves to gossip. Tarley isn't a braggart, but I can guarantee that before that airship goes anywhere, he's going to take a bunch of trade ship captains up for a ride around the bay. Perfect. All right. Inform the Earl that his airship is ready, and inform Duke Seavden that he's in the queue, first up from the new shop when it opens. We already discussed the matter, with one shop for the Signia nobility to improve their fleets, and the other shop for private customers. We'll get it done. But you should likely call Rill over and explain the situation. He likely already knows, but it's better that he hears it from you, Jack reminded him. I will go see him this afternoon, before the airship leaves the hangar. Chapter 717. Warn the Guild. Dominic finished the spears for the knights before he left the forge, intending to pass them out to boost morale after a rough day of training with the Royal Guards. However, when he did make it to the training grounds with the bundle, he did not find exhausted and dejected knights, but completely thrilled ones, excited to be learning new tactics. Their training was extensive, but they were not one of the greatest knight orders, and the Signian Royal Order were elites, even among the other nations' royal guards. Gentlemen, I have equipment for you. The rifles will take a few more days, but I have a few of them for you today, and I've got a whole batch of pistols and spears at a quality standard that won't embarrass Stantia Province. If we're going to send you out to be our representatives, we can't have you losing members in engagements with monsters or bandits. It's not a good look for the province. So, I've prepared these for you. Dominic placed the stack of spears against the training weapons rack and placed the pistols on one of the arming tables. Grab one of each and add it to your equipment. These will be the signature weapons of your unit, along with the rifles, but I can make you new swords if you need them as well. They just take significantly more time to make than a spear. The knights came forward to grab the spears first, admiring the power of the new weaponry. If we had known that things would get this easy, we would have volunteered for this mission earlier. Here, most of us thought that we'd be fighting bandits and ogres with whatever a newly formed rural fiefdom could offer to remote patrols. But it appears that the royal forge didn't leave the Duke. Even if the Duke left the forge, the commander of the Malton Knights joked. True enough. But I'm a firm believer in having the right tools for the job. That's why the rifles are designed to fire solid shot as well as mana bullets. Ogres take limited damage from magic, and there are far too many of them in the area. I wouldn't worry about it nearly as much if they weren't as hostile as they are. However, they have been on a rampage lately, and they tend to attack anything that they see. That's true of many of the other species as well, but the ogres are a particularly high-threat creature. Now, I have some other matters to attend to. And honestly, I couldn't teach you much of anything that the royal guards couldn't teach you better. The knights laughed. Nobody actually expected a duke to be more skilled in the art of war and bandit patrols than lifelong professional soldiers, especially the royal guards, who literally devoted their entire life to the task until they retired. With that, Dominic left them to their training and went to talk to Rill before he went to the airship docks. The merchant was waiting for him when he arrived, having seen Dominic coming from blocks away. The guild office was crowded, with multiple caravan drivers in the office waiting for analysis of their shipments or delivery of the purchases they wished to make. Not everything was stored in one warehouse here in Westover, as it was designated as a major trade hub, but also because not everything went by ground these days. An increasing number of airships were being sent to Westover to load, or to consolidate orders for transport to another country. The foreign trade caravan operators were easy enough for Dominic to spot. Some were clearly not from Signia, like the black-eyed and black-haired merchant from Hitchia. Others because of their fashion. The people of Chip had a particular fondness for a local style of slip-on sandals, and they would wear them anywhere that there was no snow. Probably a few places that there was snow as well, but Dominic couldn't confirm that. Branch manager, if you've got a moment? Dominic asked. Of course, Your Grace. If you want to wait in my office, I will be there in just a moment. I've got a few signatures to get these shipments on the road. Dominic nodded and waited in the main room. It wasn't an urgent matter, just a courtesy call to let him know that his customers weren't getting the next airship out of the docks. That would certainly be a letdown for the man, but going by the crowd in his building, there was no shortage of work even without adding new airships. Dominic hadn't been to check how many here docked outside the city, but going by the crowd, it was more than a few, and some of them were a long way from home. Clearly, they had made a very long trip, as using a portal for an airship simply wasn't feasible. The difficulty increased in a linear fashion with distance, which was the usual limiter. But the mana needed to open a non-standard portal was directly related to the surface area of the portal. So, a small one to drop off letters was relatively easy. A portal the size of an airship was many hundreds of times more mana-intensive than one the size of a person. Even he wasn't going to be sending an airship far. The entire city would be drained of ambient mana just to attempt it. True to his word, Rill only took a moment before he shuffled everyone else off to his assistance. So, I suspect that a personal visit means bad news. Are the rumors true, and the king commandeered the airship works for production in the national interest? Dominic shook his head. Not quite that bad. We've been training a second team to fully staff the second building, and one will be dedicated to deliveries for the Signian nobility and army, while the other will make airships for private customers. The one coming off the rack next will be going to Earl Tarley, who is hoping to do some international trading. Chapter 718. And check the hangar. Ah, that is a relief. We were worried that we might not get another airship for most of a year, but it should only be a few months before we have another, Rill sighed. Exactly. I can't guarantee that the balance will remain. But the army is willing to take its time to get airships from us. I suspect that they're working on a similar design at the capital city airship factory. They've already started making the Magitech cannons for the existing airships, so it wouldn't shock me if they made a lighter and faster version of our cargo airships loaded with guns for intercepting smugglers and invasion forces. The age of the airship is just getting started, I suspect. The merchant shrugged. I've heard that there might be alternatives to the airship. Winged aeroplanes. Dominic smiled. Well, that's an option. But they have their own issues. Like, where are you going to put the cargo if all the fuselage space is taken up by the steam boiler and everything else? You could directly drive the propellers on magic, but that means powerful mages to be pilots. We thought of using them to intercept Dago's airships during the invasion, and ended up going for magic-assisted gliders. Rill shrugged. I'm sure that there will be a solution eventually, even if it does involve some loss of cargo space. That's not really the point, though. Don't be afraid to let your people keep innovating, and I'm sure that Wistover will stay on top of Magitech development. Dominic laughed. We've actually got plans for that, a program to keep top students at the academy as researchers and teachers. It's how the mage sects have always done it, but we're going to give it a little tweak to have them focus on things that the duchy could use, or ones that might help the businesses in town, instead of focusing on the sect. The merchant smiled. All right, I won't get upset that we're going to have to wait a bit for the next airship. It will be enough to keep our merchants happy. I deliberately set the delivery timing standards low, in case there were delays or changes of design now that there have been a few thousand hours of airtime on the first few. It doesn't look like they've got any surprise structural flaws, though. That's actually pretty surprising from a new design. Normally, we expect them to have to come back to the shop a few times to alter small glitches before they're truly good to go. It just comes with purchasing a new design. Dominic shook his hand and made his way over to the airship factory so that he could check in on them and ensure that everything was going to go smoothly. The Earl had been informed that his airship was ready, and his captain should be here soon. It would take some adjustment before the crew was ready to be left unattended. They had to go over the functions, controls, features, and limitations of the airship before it was safe to send a crew out on their own. Especially if they weren't hiring one of the Wistover techno-wizards as their engineer. Everyone who had taken delivery so far had hired one of the techno-wizards that they had taught the basics of repair and maintenance, but Dominic didn't know if that had been brought up with the Earl. He certainly had forgotten to mention it. By the time that he made it across time, Dominic was regretting not going to grab his mechanical horse. Walking through town invited everyone he passed to stop and say hello, or give him a short update on how things were going on their farm, or the various baronies. Now, that was all valuable information, which was why he didn't try to stop them. But it did slow things down quite a lot. He knocked before entering the shop, but he could tell that nobody would hear him over the sound of hammers and cursing. Gentlemen, anything that I can help with? He called as he walked in. Yeah, teach the new guy how to hold a fucking lantern. Dominic laughed. Sorry, that is outside the scope of my abilities. However, it's good to see that you've been productive even while waiting to make a delivery. Gully, the airship design team leader, laughed. Nobody will ever hold a light well enough for a dwarf, which is ironic, considering how well we see in the dark. Now, are we ready to make this delivery? We're about set to let it out of the hangar and have our lads teach the Earl's techno-wizard how to maintain and operate the systems to their fullest capacity. Oh, I'm surprised that he sent his own. I may have forgotten to tell him that we had some in training. However, we're going to run out of them again. We've got orders for dozens of airships, and I don't think we have that many trainees. Gully winked at him. We do if we count the apprentices. They can operate the machine well enough, and by the time that we finish our training, they'll be 80% of a journeyman anyhow. After that, they can just learn on the job and cry themselves to sleep until they learn the rest of what they should have picked up already. The younger people in the room sighed in defeat. Clearly, they had been the target of the engineers' training for some time now. They were all techno-wizards, though low-level ones fresh out of their respective academies. But the academy had not prepared them for working directly under a dwarven master engineer. Gully was extreme in both his techniques and his knowledge level, which made him immediately assume everyone else should be as well. I've informed the merchants about the schedule. Go ahead and launch, so you can get the airworthiness testing done. I'm sure that the Earl will appreciate the good news. Chapter 719, Last Minute Practice. 1 week after the airship was removed from the hangar, it was finally delivered to the freshly trained crew, and the design team had split to operate both shops at the same time. But more importantly, Dominic had finally finished all the rifles and other equipment for the Malton Knights, who were scheduled to start their first patrol of the region this morning. They didn't have much time to practice with the rifles, but they were all skilled marksmen. Thought their rifles had been the outdated steam rifles that the Capital Knights had discarded during the battle in favor of the ones that Dominic and the rest of the Forge had been making. Good enough to go monster hunting for certain. But they relied on a backpack system for pressure. They were heavy, cumbersome, slow to charge, and had limited capacity without being refilled with water. For what they were great. But compared to the new designs, which had rifled barrels, self-contained lever-action charging, ammunition creation orbs built in, and higher-level enchantments to increase their damage, they were practically a relic. Dominic had put out the row of rifles for them when they came to the training grounds to prepare to leave for their first mission today, and now it was time to watch the show. Gentlemen, in honor of your first outing, I have one final equipment upgrade for you. Take a few minutes to test these rifles before you leave so that you're familiar with them when it's time to fight. I know that you'll be headed through the baronies first, before you head up into Kainwen province. But it's best to get any questions you have answered before you go, instead of having the mages forward them to me. I have provided a simple repair guide for your armorer, so he will be able to manage any small damages that you might have. But if it's beyond him, they can be shipped back to me for retrofit. These rifles were specifically designed for hunting ogres, but they're equally effective on nearly everything that you might come across. The only downfall they have in the hands of someone who is not a mage is that they don't have the area damage that a shotgun does. So, aiming is a requirement, and you can't stop a group of charging goblins. For that, I would recommend using your pistols. The knights laughed as they thought of the possibilities. Charging goblins were a minimal threat, and they could take out the hobgoblins in advance with the rifles. Then, pistols until the goblins were near spear range. The new spears that Dominic had made would cleave through goblins like swinging a stick through water. Hardly enough resistance to count. The soldiers grabbed their new rifles and ran off to the firing range at the back of the manor. The Royal Guard practiced there, and there was a reinforced backdrop in case someone missed a shot on the wooden targets. Dave was happy to keep repairing the targets, though his fingers were too thick to use the rifles. It was just fun to watch everyone else playing with their weapons. Dave enjoyed the simple things. While they were sighting in their rifles, something that Dominic had already done, but had set to 100 meters for the sake of uniformity, the mages he had hired to accompany them arrived. They had 2 new vehicles from the factory, the Westover Standard Extended Utility Vehicles, affectionately known simply as the bus to the locals. There was a mage from the Duskblade sect in each, and a troll from the Sands sect in the passenger seat. They had healing magic, but that was not why they were chosen. The trolls were chosen for their skills with potions, as well as with cooking. Letting the squires do all the cooking for the knights was guaranteed to be a low-level disaster. Dominic was certain of it. Sending along a pair of proper cooks, who also had the ingredients for potions with them, and a stockpile of essential alchemical concoctions, would make life much better for the group. Having the mages driving gave them some additional firepower, but also allowed them to open portals back to Westover for reinforcements if they were in trouble. That added versatility would make all the difference if there was still a larger force hiding somewhere in the wilderness of Kainwen province. Not every military unit that had been serving under Prince Kaizan had been accounted for, thanks to the floods. So, there might still be some in hiding who had no intentions of settling down peacefully. The trucks would also let them carry gear out in the open instead of in a storage device, which made it easier to get to and kept a random accident or casualty from having them lose access to something mission critical, like the soup pot. Boss. It looks like the boys are about ready for their mission. One of the 2 trolls, a middle-aged slender man with deep blue skin, greeted Dominic. Yeah, I just gave them some rifles. Give them 10 minutes, and they'll be all mounted up and ready to go. Everything is staged. Do you have all the supplies? We got everything, plus some extras, out of the supply budget. We'll be fine. The mages from the Duskblade also brought trade goods for the baronies so that they can make some side money when we visit the baronies. Can't blame a man for wanting to make a little on the side. I'm guessing that they're planning to sell spell gems and such. The troll nodded. And magical wards. They've pre-made some building repair wards and defensive barriers. Those were expensive. But every baron would want them if their house didn't have one, or it was damaged beyond repair. The techno-wizards had been out to repair as much as they could, but adding features to the houses would have to wait, and most of the baronies didn't have barriers over the house. It simply wasn't something that they had prioritized. Chapter 720. Airship Swap. Once they had put a few dozen rounds through their new rifles, the knights mounted up, and everyone prepared to leave Westover, headed northeast through the baronies, and then northwest up the main path through Limpsbury and into Kynwyn province. With them gone, and everything set up to operate without interference on his part, Dominic assumed that things would begin to settle down for a little bit. It would take weeks before the patrol was into Kynwyn province, and until then, he wouldn't have any updates on the situation within the region. There wasn't anyone there to report. Sure, there were messages regularly from the airships that flew over, and the Merchants Guild had sent a few caravans through the region, but none of them had reported more than the occasional farming village closer to the border which hadn't flooded. In the northern regions of the province, before they turned off the highway to avoid the ruins of the capital, they didn't report seeing anything at all. Still, Dominic didn't slow down on his work. In the mornings, he had meetings with the advisors, then lunch with Alexis, an afternoon in the forge, and back to the house for the evening. It was a good routine, and he was generating a huge stockpile of rifles, spears, and pistols, all of which could be included in the shipment to Dagos, as they were on the list. But he wouldn't send them firearms. He wasn't feeling that generous. He might send them some uncommon grade spears. They were expensive enough to be worth the space that they took up in a shipment, and the nation could certainly use a few thousand more of them. But the baronies had started submitting a portion of the harvest as tribute, though they were tax-exempt for the next year and a half still. They had decided it was better to set everyone's expectations right from the start, so they took a tenth of the harvest, which was so large that they were having issues finding enough space to store it anyhow, and sent it to the city. From there, Dominic forwarded it to the Merchants Guild, so they could send some to Dagos, and the rest toward Castle City and Darden, who were still suffering from a ruined crop and an influx of refugees. It was keeping the supply routes fully stocked, and the money was flowing steadily back into the duchy's coffers. Alexis and Julio took care of most of the financial issues, as she had decided that spending on events within the manor and the city was under her purview as a household expense, which only left Dominic to deal with the businesses. And business was booming. 10 days after the knights left on patrol, 2 new airships were finished, a full week ahead of schedule. One went to Duke Seavedon, and the other went to the Merchants Guild, who had to hastily summon their customer to the city. That brought Rill to Dominic's office, instead of the other way around. Your Grace, it's good to see you again. We've got a small matter for you today. One of our men would like to make a trade for his new airship, instead of selling assets to get the cash. Rill began. Oh, lay it on me. If it's something that the duchy needs, I'm willing to trade for it. I can afford to pay materials and labor for the airships. Rill smiled. That was an understatement. Even with exorbitant rates that he paid the workers at the airship hangars, one airship sale would pay the entire team's annual wage. Going by current market value, the new airships are worth 5 of the old schooner-class airships. And that's what he would like to trade. Direct transfer of 5 schooner-class airships, set up for cargo, to the duchy, in exchange for the new cargo airship. Dominic considered the offer. It was a good deal, as the trade rate should be closer to 4.5 times the value of a schooner-class airship in the old design. They were relatively slow, barely making 20 nautical miles an hour. Now, compared to ground travel, that was amazing, as they didn't have to stop at night or get slowed by bad roads or traffic. But the new ones could casually cruise close to 60 nautical miles an hour, a little over 100 kilometers an hour in ground travel terms. For cargo, the winner was clear. It might only hold twice as much as a schooner-pattern ship, which normally still had a full wooden hull, as a converted seafaring vessel. But the speed made it a completely different business proposal. That was not what Dominic wanted them for, though. He wanted to convert them to gunships, loaded with cannons, to patrol the duchy. They didn't need to be particularly fast or fly higher than foreign interceptors could reach. They needed to be able to see threats on the ground and target them. All right, I will take that deal. Bring the airships to the hangars, and I will have the lads get to converting them when they've got a moment. I'll be putting the old airships to work as a defensive fleet for the duchy. The fact that they can move cargo between us and the baronies is just a bonus, and likely won't even be necessary at the rate that we're building improved roads. Rill nodded. I will give him the good news. He's in line for 2 more airships in the new design, but plans to pay cash for those after liquidating the older ships in his fleet to you with this one. Dominic nodded. As long as he has a fully trained crew, he won't have to wait too long. They're already trained for the systems on the old ships, and they have a techno-wizard in each crew. They'll just need an update on the new systems, and I'm sure they'll be fine. They'll all arrive for training when they turn in their old ships, and they'll remain until their new ones are ready. That made life easier, and Gully would be happy to have time to teach the techno-wizards about all the systems as the ships were built. And now, Wistover was going to have airborne artillery. Once he got more of those Wings of Light spells made and soldiers trained, that would give him the perfect platform for Magitech paratroopers as well. If they were already in the air, there was no need to scramble them to deal with a threat.